tragic truth. It all adds up. It all falls into place. The deception ends here.
Hey, what's up people? So as you know, I'm a big Nefer fan and this video has been highly requested. So with her and Lauma's reruns coming up in a few days, I've got this guide on how to invest into your team. This is because Nefer's team has been very popular for the past few months, many of you finding it fun and strong, and it's probably many of you getting close to or even over 200k DPS. You can see that is what I'm getting roughly with this team. So you're happy to invest further into your Nefer team, but you might just not know where to start. Like, do you get Nefer's weapon? There's Nefer C1, Nefer C2 looks strong, even Lauma C1 giving healing, Lauma C2 looks strong. There are many teams where it's obvious what upgrade to get because they just don't have that many choices. So just like with my other characters, I went ahead and made this cost-effective general damage increases, but it is complex, so I've got quite a lot of options here. First of all, don't worry too much about the fourth character that you play. For starters, I separated it into how much pulls you actually have for this banner. Do you have enough pulls for just one thing, or can you invest into more things, be a bit more long term? For example, if you just have enough for one pulls, this is kind of organized by just the strongest damage increases. Just remember, when I do these things, it's a general order, not set in stone, and I'm not just looking at calcs, but I'm also looking at how the damage increases could affect things based on my gameplay knowledge and just a bit of nuance. So if you only have enough pulls for one 5-star guaranteed, I've gone with, you should probably get Nefer C1 first. Nefer C1, it increases the base damage of pretty much all her hits, increasing it by 60% of her EM. The only thing is, as we'll get into, if you're able to pull more investments into your Nefer, you will know that the issue with Nefer C1 is it doesn't buff Lauma's quills. And although Nefer's own multipliers are pretty good, Lauma's quills are a significant part of your team's damage, which is why your Nefer's damage drops off a lot if you aren't able to cast Lauma's burst, or worst case if you don't even have Lauma. But if you only have enough for one 5-star, you're not going to be able to get Lauma C2 anyway. So just by itself, it's generally one of the bigger damage increases. Honestly, a lot of these upgrades, as you can see, are very similar in damage increases, but Nefer C1 is just going to be consistently one of the highest. Now, after you get Nefer C1, I kind of put the next two as you could debate either, which is getting Nefer's signature weapon or going ahead and getting her C2. That's because even though her weapon is very strong, the actual upgrade you get of this does depend on what you're starting with. For example, if you're starting off with the craftable Black Marrow Lantern, then you can get it over 23%. It's pretty similar to Nefer C1, but maybe you have Dawning Frost, which is the gacha weapon, which is also coincidentally on this current banner. But if you manage to get this, even if you manage to get a bunch of refinements on this, then you're starting to get closer to that lower range. I would consider the upper ranges of this calculation here to be more realistic, since if you have a high refined Dawning Frost putting on this banner, you probably already have Nefer's weapon at that point. If there is some universe where you have a high refined Dawning Frost, then Nefer's C2 is quite similar to her weapon. What Nefer C2 does is it increases the unique multiplier of this Veil of Falsehood from 3 stacks of 8, so from 24% unique multiplier to a 40% unique multiplier. On top of that, you change her EM talent from 100 EM to 200 EM. So it does two things quite well, but it's generally not going to be as big of an upgrade as Nefer C1 or her weapon. Speaking of that, just to get into one of the common comparisons, you might want to know what's stronger, Nefer's C1 R1 or Nefer's C2 with Black Marrow. Nefer C1 with her signature is slightly better. But now this is why we're not focused too much on calculations, because as you can see here, I've put Lauma C2 number 4 here if you don't have much pulls in your bank, but if you can get multiple things, I've put it number 1. So what is the difference, and why would I generally recommend getting Lauma C2 as soon as you can? Now you might see here Lauma C2 is getting a huge damage increase. It's higher here when you get it first, but then it gets slightly weaker if you get it after a few other things. We'll get into that in a second. The thing with Lauma C2 is you have to pull 2 5-stars. You have to get a C1 and her C2, and it's slightly weaker than the others for 2 cost, but you get a healer. Lauma C1 is quite famous because it doesn't technically increase your damage, but it gives you access to a healer, which can be very important because I'm sure, as you guys know, it can be very difficult to fit in sustains into Nefer's team. Now, despite that, she has a monstrous C2, which basically doubles her quills from 400% of her EM to 800%, and then it just gives you a reaction damage bonus of 40%. So you can get over a 30% increase on Nefer on top of getting some real sustain. Now, interestingly, usually in Nefer upgrades, her personal damage goes up, but her team damage goes up slightly less. And that's because Nefer is a hyper carry, but she's usually maybe around 70 to 80% of your team's damage. Now, what Lauma C2 does is, because it makes her quills much stronger, Lauma usually gets 18 quills, which is perfectly enough for Nefer's whole combo, but she can actually get spare quills which aren't used by Nefer. So the strength is, if you've got another character that's able to use Lauma's quills, like Columbina. If you look at Columbina's multipliers here, it's 2.5% of her HP. Lauma's quills can actually more than double your Columbina's base damage. And because Columbina is able to trigger 5 of these at a time, she's able to take advantage of all those spare quills, making the overall team increase higher. Now, there's a few complex things around Lauma C2, so I want to get into that. First of all, why is it stronger here at the start compared to weaker later? And that's because things like Nefer C1 buffing her own non-quill damage. Nefer's investments don't buff Lauma's quills as much, but it also works the other way around. Getting Lauma's C2 first can kind of devalue Nefer's constellations because they won't scale with Lauma's quills as well. That's one of the advantages of Nefer's signature weapon, is that because it just gives crit rate, EM. In fact, Nefer's signature weapon can kind of even get a bit better, to be honest, because the stronger Lauma's quills are, because Lauma's quills uses her own EM, 4-star weapons which have a ton of EM aren't scaling as well as a weapon like her signature, which has less EM but has more crit. Now, here's the thing which is a bit complex. A common thing people want to know is, what is stronger, Nefer C2 versus Lauma C2? And the calcs I've done so far are looking at Columbina teams. And as we talked about before, Columbina scales really well with Lauma constellations. In a Columbina team, Nefer C2 is maybe slightly better. I'm getting like 1% better. It could be around that level. Now, the thing is, if you're playing Nefer with Ino, and unlike Columbina, who's able to take advantage of Lauma's quills, Ino doesn't really have anything of the sort. She just does her own damage, and she has buffs for Nefer with her C1 and her C6. Maybe even instructor set if you're able to get that. The thing is, Nefer is way more of a hyper carry with Ino than with Columbina, which means the fact that Nefer's constellations are going to be technically stronger than Lauma's constellations, that gap widens a lot. And I'm getting Nefer C2 being over a 17% damage increase if you're playing Ino. For example, in the Columbina team, Nefer goes from about 85% of your team's damage to under 80, devaluing some of those buffs, whereas I know Nefer's always a super hyper carry, so Lauma C2 buffing the whole team doesn't really matter. On top of that, because Lauma C2 uses quills and quills are consumed per enemy, that means in AoE situations all your attacks might not be buffed by her quills, whereas Nefer's constellations are always increasing her damage. So what I want you to take away is, if your question is just what is more damage, Nefer's C1, C2, Nefer's weapon, or Lauma C2, mathematically, investing those 2 5-star pulls into Nefer is basically, worst case, going to be about as good as Lauma C2, but best case, it can be a very noticeable amount stronger than Lauma C2. The thing is, I'm not making this video purely on mathematics, and the reality is, this difference here in a Columbina team, I'm sure many of you are playing Columbina, it's very small, at least in single target, when you're not losing quills in AoE. And being able to secure a sustain in your Nefer team is very valuable, not just for myself who's a tryhard, but for a lot of you guys who are probably even less tryhard than me, I would easily take Lauma C2 first. And that's why I put it number 1 here. I just want you to know that people aren't necessarily wrong if they say Nefer's investments are stronger than Lauma C2, because I know a lot of people think that Lauma C2 is a healer and it's stronger than Nefer's, which I don't think is the case. It's just very close in a lot of situations, but the healing is amazing. Anyway, they're both in different orders, and regardless if you get those, the next step should be just getting Nefer to C6, which is the case for pretty much most modern characters. Their constellations, especially their C6s, are just way better than anything else. So there's no point in really calculating it. You know what to do, and at this point your damage is so high you probably don't really care. I should mention some honorable mentions, which is if you're putting on Nefer's weapon banner, you have a chance of getting Lauma's weapon. It does buff the team, but not that much. Most people, even tryhards, are still making do with the free-to-play event weapon, I believe, this one here. So if you got Lauma signature on your way to getting Nefer's weapon, then use it. If not, it's never going to compare with the other things I've talked about. Similar with Columbina vertical investment, it's not bad, but it's always going to be worse than the other things. But if you don't like getting C6s, I guess you could just get C2 on everyone. So that's my priority order if you want to make notes of this. Hopefully you understand there's a bit of nuances here. Now moving on to the rest of the video, investment wise, there's probably a lot of questions wondering which 4th teammate to play. Now personally, I don't like telling people you have to play certain 4th characters. Very similar with Skirk, where I would say finishing Nefer's team is pretty optional. You've probably seen that the highest DPS options are like Sucrose or Nahida, but if you don't have Lauma C2, stuff like this is sustainless. Nilou as well, you might not have her constellations that shred Dendro. So I would say, although sustainless options like these 3 are going to be more damage than these other sustains, you're perfectly fine playing one of these sustains if you find them more comfortable or you like these characters. This is where the value of Lauma C2 shines, because the C1 healing can make you feel comfortable with the strongest teammates. And ultimately pick based on your preference and pick based on who you have. For example, there's no point me really talking about Sucrose being lower cost. Options like Nahida, Nilou are old characters. You either have them already or you don't have them. So if you have Sucrose, play her. If you have Nahida, you can play her. I personally use my Nahida a lot, even in Dire. And she doesn't have constellations. She's C0 and I use Favonius Codex. That's because Nahida probably has slightly less damage than Sucrose, because you're not able to take advantage of Instructor as well. But her being Dendro does make your energy requirements on Nefer and Lauma way easier. Also, her being able to use Favonius Codex, whereas with Sucrose you're probably using Sac Frags. That's extra energy for the team, especially nice in Stygian. And if you're able to get Nahida's C2, Denji's even stronger, and a lot of you might already have this. But let's go on to team builds, because you should know that the different teams can have different builds for the characters. So Nefer's build in every team is the same, which is trying to reach 60 crit rate and then trying to get as much crit damage in EM as possible. And some ER is nice, you don't have to get any. Why you want 60 crit rate is because her signature set, the Nodcry Knights of the Sky Unveiling, this gives 30 crit rate to her, so she's at 90. But then Lauma gives Nefer an extra 10% crit rate. So similar to your Natlan teammates who were using the Obsidian Codex set, you want to go for 60 and then just go for artifacts that raise her crit and EM. Very straightforward. Double crown her. Now the other characters is where it can get a bit confusing, because the thing with Sucrose and what can make her the strongest option better than Nahida is because you're able to give her Instructor and she's able to react with your Columbina's Hydro to buff the team with more EM than Nahida's Burst gives. Now maybe that is a bit tryhard, in which case you can use the same build as your Nahida build, but for this, when you use Instructor, you always need 2 characters in your Nefer team, one of them on the SMS set, which gives 120 EM, and one of them on Deepwood Memories, which reduces targets res by 30. So because Sucrose is taking Instructor, you need to give them to these other 2. Now what I usually do is I give Deepwood to Lauma when I'm playing Instructor Sucrose, and I aim for a lot of energy recharge. Maybe this is a bit overkill, but this is what works for me. And then just going for EM and ER in her artifacts. And then Columbina on the SMS set, I give a Prototype Amber for extra healing. If you have Lauma C2, you could give Columbina Favonius Codex instead. If you have a signature, you could use that instead. But I give her the SMS set and then just fill it with damage stats and energy recharge. I got some pretty decent pieces. You can even do triple HP if you want. You can do HP, and then a crit rate circlet if you want. Whatever. Now, you're probably wondering, doesn't Columbina have a signature set? Morningstar and Moon. Now, the thing with this is, this set is good in other Columbina teams. In a Nefer team, it's not good because you want all your teammates to be buffing Nefer's damage. And Columbina in these teams compared to other Lunar teams, she does not do that much damage. So boosting her damage a bit here is just not worth it. Oh yeah, interestingly, pretty much all characters in Nefer teams, you only need 2 crowns. So these can be quite cheap to build. But now you're probably wondering, what if you're not a tryhard? What if you're not using Instructor? Say for example, you're playing Nahida. Now Nahida can pretty much be glued to Deepwood memories, which means you've freed up a set. So I still keep Columbina on SMS. Maybe with Nahida you need less ER because she's really good with Favonius Codex. So you can drop your Columbina's ER by a bit. Same thing with your Lauma, but instead of Deepwood memories, what I like to do is, because her quills scale off of her EM, instead of Deepwood memories, I like to go for double EM sets. So tick your Gilded Dreams, maybe tick your Flower of Paradise Lost. So this is what I've got, and that is what my build looks like. Getting the crit is actually quite nice here because you do use her hold E, and you can get like over 200k hold E's, which does scale off of her crit. But if you can't manage to get a lot of EM, ER and crit in pieces, then don't worry too much about it. Now, in case you were wondering, can't you put Instructor on someone in a team like this? Instructor needs you to do a reaction. And if your team's full of Hydro and Dendro characters, the only character that can use Instructor here is Columbina, which is not necessarily worth it because you'll completely kill your Columbina's damage. And honestly, you can run a similar thing with other characters. Like even with Sucrose, you can still run her on Deepwood memories because you don't need to do a reaction with Deepwood. You just need to hit a skill or burst. You could use the same Deepwood memories with Shinobu. There's also Jahoda. Now Jahoda I like to run similar to the Sucrose team, where I would give her Instructor and then Deepwood Lauma, SMS Columbina. Pretty much any 4th character, if they're not Dendro or Hydro, you can run them on Instructor. They might not be giving as much buffs as a Sucrose, but that Instructor buff is always helpful. One character I do want to mention is Nilou. You normally give her HP pieces or the Flower of Paradise Lost in her Bloom teams, but she doesn't do damage in these teams because Nefer kind of turns off Nilou's damage. So what you do here is you actually give her the SMS set, and then you can give Lauma Deepwood instead. Maybe then you can give Columbina the All Bad set. The SMS set, it doesn't require your support to do damage, it just requires your support to hit the enemy, which is a different mechanic to the Deepwood set. It's a bit confusing because the wording is similar, but Deepwood actually requires your skill or your burst to do damage. The SMS set, just by getting her ring up, this technically is hitting enemies. So Nilou does activate the SMS set. So if you're playing Nilou, that is what you want to run on her.
Can't hide the truth. No more lies. Seek within.
Animal Tech 60.
By the frost moon of old, receive my moonlit night for all.
Swirl.
It all ends up. No more lies.
Stay clear.
With one heart, we pray. Branches a new moon rises. Flame.
Animal Tech 60.
Can't hide the truth. It all adds up. It all falls into place. The
Lastly, if you don't want to try hard with Sucrose, I do want to showcase just how to play some other teammate options. For example, Nahida is a lot easier than Sucrose. All you have to do is start with Nahida, then go to Columbina, then go to Lauma, then go to your Nefer, and Nahida's great energy generation will just make this so easy to play. With Nahida, you use her skill, then her burst, into Columbina, skill, burst, and then Lauma, yep, you guessed it, skill, then the burst. And the energy in this team is just very comfortable. See, if I kept going, I could probably get it close to 200k. But it's very easy to play and very comfortable. The only issue is it doesn't have a sustain. So let me gear up my Jahoda with Favonius Warbow, and then I kind of want to give her some instructor pieces. So her damage doesn't matter, just get her some ER, crit rate to proc 5, energy recharge as well. That looks more than good enough. So how you want to play Jahoda is you start off with Columbina into Jahoda's burst, and then you run around with her skill. Once that thing fills up, that thing has to fill up or you don't get her full C6 buffs. And as you can see, Jahoda's raw damage is pretty similar to Sucrose. She just has such a long rotation that it's worse than Sucrose. But this is pretty comfortable. Let that fill up. Into Lauma again. She just applied extra Hydro, which is nice, I guess. And you can see Jahoda's not bad. I'm getting 177k DPS. Nefer's doing 75% of the team's damage. It's a bit awkward to play, to be honest. When you're in Jahoda's skill state as well, she is very fragile, which is kind of awkward. But I mean, if you want to play Jahoda Nefer, you can do something like that. If you want to see even more teams, you can check out my video I posted 3 months ago. There's a Diona team as well. I show the rotations and the builds for that. But that's it for the video. Hopefully I covered some of the questions you might have had. Maybe one obvious question I didn't cover was maybe how big of an upgrade is Lauma, and should Lauma be #1? The answer is obvious. Nefer does basically need Lauma. If you don't have Lauma, definitely get her before anything else. That kind of goes without saying. But any other small questions I might have missed, feel free to let me know in the comments. I'm also going to put the spreadsheet in the description if you want to share it around. And thanks for watching, guys. Good luck on your pulls and have a good day.